They called it just a fever. That exact diagnosis was written in the file by the doctor, not once, but twice. But a fever doesn't last for 4 months. And a fever doesn't kick inside the stomach of a 10-year-old girl. By the time they called the midwife, it was far too late to conceal the family's deed. What crawled from that cabin in the Appalachian darkness didn't merely haunt the valley, it placed a curse upon it. For more than a century, no one dared to ask about that child's origin or the true identity of the father. Hello everyone. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling us where you're from and what time you're watching. This tells YouTube you want more stories exactly like this one. Their home was on the edge of Breath County, Kentucky, a place where the trees grow thick and the roads simply fade into brush and silence. The year was 1892, and for 8 miles in every direction, the Blackburns had no neighbors. This was no accident. The land was unforgiving, the winters were brutal, and the stories were even worse. People had long memories when it came to old Reuben Blackburn. They remembered how he lost 3 wives, burying them all behind the barn without a single preacher. They recalled how his brother was discovered frozen to death, his eyes wide open and his boots gone. But the most persistent whispers were about his daughter. Her name was Clara, born small, pale, and utterly silent. When she entered the world, she did not cry. That alone was enough to start the talk. It was her eyes, however, that truly set people on edge, one brown, the other a slate gray, both circled by a strange yellow hue, like candle wax left too long in the flame. No one in the family, they said, had eyes like those. No one, that is, except for Reuben himself. She never attended school, never played with other children. She was kept on the farm, taught to cook and clean, and instructed never to speak unless spoken to. By her 10th birthday, she still had never once been to town. Then, one night in the middle of March, a frantic knock came at the doctor's door. It was Reuben, wild-eyed, his coat soaked with blood, mumbling about his daughter being sick in the stomach. When the doctor arrived, Clara lay on a bed of hay, her small body heaving. But she wasn't dying, she was in labor. The baby came fast, according to the midwife, far too fast, as if it had been ready for weeks. The infant was stillborn, twisted, its mouth frozen wide open. And Clara? She never uttered a single word, not during the birth, not after, not for the rest of her life. The events of that night were never entered into any official file. But the midwife did write something on a slip of paper, which she kept hidden until her death. 3 words, all in capital letters. Not her fault. After that night, Clara vanished. Not in body, she still lived in the same rotting house at the wood's edge. But the girl everyone had whispered about became something else entirely. Those brave enough to visit the Blackburn property said she moved differently, much slower, as if her bones no longer worked correctly. Her skin grew even paler. Her hair, once thick and brown, began falling out in clumps before she turned 12. The strangest change, however, was her silence. Clara had never been talkative, but now she wouldn't even respond to her own name. Reuben, on the other hand, was a different story. In the months following the birth, he grew more volatile, drunk, erratic, and cruel. He was seen shouting at nothing in the middle of the woods. He even locked himself in the cellar for 5 days at one point, emerging while muttering about keeping the blood clean. And though people had always harbored suspicions about him, the rumors now turned poisonous. Folks began to connect the dots. Reuben's last wife, Martha, had died giving birth to a stillborn boy, a child reported to have a twisted spine and no ears. That had been 6 years before Clara's labor. Now, people whispered whether Martha was even Clara's real mother. Some said Reuben had made Clara in the same way he'd made that baby, in secret, in sin, in silence. No birth certificate existed, no marriage records, only a grave behind the barn. And a child whose eyes mirrored her father's. The community lived by one rule: if a family crossed a certain line, you did not confront them. You simply made space. And quietly, Reuben had built that space himself. Miles of it. But what haunted people most wasn't just Clarara's fate. It was what started happening to the land. Fields where nothing would grow. Animals discovered mutilated. A town boy who went missing after hunting near the Blackburn property. They never found him. Then there was the preacher's wife, who swore she saw Clarara walking barefoot through the cemetery one night, cradling a child in her arms. A child no one ever saw again. By 1895, the Blackburns were no longer just recluses. They were legends, cursed ones. In the following years, even the county records began to disappear, burned, misfiled, or simply erased, as if someone wanted the entire bloodline buried, not just the baby. A name didn't surface again until 1911, Elias Blackburn. The census taker listed him as head of household, age 16, occupation, laborer. But the town clerk noted something strange in the margin, no known parentage. Said to be Clarara's son. No father listed. By then, Clarara would have been only 29, but townspeople claimed she looked over 50. Her teeth had yellowed to stubs, her back was hunched, and she wore thick layers in the summer heat to hide what they called her scars. No one knew who the father was, or at least, no one would say. Some suspected she had been taken advantage of again. Others whispered darker things, that Elias wasn't a new child at all, but a second birth from the same unholy lineage. A continuation of a cycle that started long before anyone alive could remember. Elias didn't talk much either. He never went to school, worked odd jobs in the mines and fields, but never lasted long. People said he had a strange odor, something off about him. Animals avoided him. Children screamed at the sight of him. He wasn't violent, not outwardly, but a coldness clung to him, and a familiarity. Several townspeople swore that Elias's left eye matched Reuben's perfectly, the same gray ring, the same waxy sheen. But by 1915, Reuben had been dead for nearly 18 years. Elias built a shack behind the original Blackburn home from old barnwood and rusted nails. He lived alone, though townsfolk claimed they sometimes saw a girl in the window, pale, thin, and unmoving. She never came outside. She never seemed to age. Some believed she wasn't alive at all, just a memory he could not bury. That same year, a traveling photographer passed through Breath County and captured a handful of images, one of the church, one of the mountains, and one, uncaptioned, of a boy standing before a leaning shack. He stares directly into the camera, one hand at his side, the other clutching something wrapped in burlap. When the photo was developed, the photographer tried to recall what he had seen. He said it looked like a doll at first, but then he noticed the hand, small, human, and missing 3 fingers. The photo never made it into the archives. An editor pulled it without explanation. But one copy remained, unearthed 90 years later by a genealogist. When the image was shared online, a forum administrator quickly deleted it. The reason given, too disturbing. Possibly real. By 1933, Kentucky was deep in the Great Depression. But in the hills above Jackson, the Blackburns were still rarely spoken of, except in whispers and warnings. Locals said the line hadn't ended with Elias, that he had taken a wife, though no marriage record was ever found. She was said to be mute, thin as bone, with skin so pale it reflected moonlight, a woman from nowhere, with no family, no history, and no name anyone could recall. By the time she appeared, Elias had boarded shut his shack's windows and hung animal bones over the doorframe. The structure sagged with mildew. Rot seeped up through the floors. And still, somehow, they kept having children. 3, to be exact. 2 daughters, 1 son. None were ever registered. No doctors were ever called. The only proof of their existence came from a schoolteacher who claimed she saw the oldest girl in the woods one morning, wearing a long wool dress and dragging a rope. The child didn't speak, she said, she just stared. When asked where her home was, the girl simply turned and walked back into the trees. But what the teacher remembered most was the girl's face, how it looked off, not monstrous, but subtly wrong, as if someone had rearranged the features of a normal child and hadn't gotten the proportions right. Then came the house fire. In 1939, a neighbor saw smoke rising from the Blackburn shack just before midnight. By the time anyone arrived, the structure was fully engulfed. There were no screams, no signs of panic, only fire. After it was out, only ashes remained. Ashes, and a single intact floorboard, scorched but unburned. On its underside, someone had carved 13 names, most of them unfamiliar. One was Elias. Another was simply CL. But among them was one name that chilled investigators, Reborn. The coroner found no bodies, not even bones. He listed the deaths as presumed, but the report was left open, unsigned. Months later, someone broke into the town archives and tore 5 pages from the Blackburn file. To this day, no one knows who did it. But the next morning, a message appeared, scrawled in charcoal on the chapel door, "The blood stays pure." In the decades that followed, the Blackburn name vanished from public record. Not a single trace remained, no births, no deaths, no land ownership. It was as if the family had dissolved into smoke. But if you ask the locals in Breath County, especially the older ones, they'll tell you it didn't end. It just went deeper. A man named Chester Boyd, who worked for the electric company in the late 1950s, once told a reporter about a strange service call up near the old Blackburn land. A new structure had been built there, modern, square, with no windows on the side facing the road. It wasn't marked on any maps. Chester knocked. A young man answered, thin and barefoot, with eyes the color of stale milk. Chester asked who lived there, and the boy replied, "My mother's father built this land. We never leave it." When Chester asked if they needed electricity, the boy smiled. "We don't let the light in." No further service was performed. Chester never filed the report. He left the job 3 months later. But he wasn't the last. In 1972, a geology student from Berea College named Mara Keyes went missing while doing research near Blackburn Hollow. Her journal was found inside a fallen log weeks later. The final entry read, "I saw them. 2 girls, same face, same dress. They stood on either side of a stump just watching. One of them mouthed something to me. No blood left. Her body was never recovered." The town sheriff at the time, William Poe, began a quiet investigation. He reviewed the old Blackburn files, cross-referenced census records, and dug through land deeds in the courthouse basement. What he found disturbed him enough to retire early and leave the state. Before he left, he gave one interview. When asked if he believed the Blackburn family still existed, he replied, "Not like you and me. Not in the way people expect. But yes, they're still here. What's left of them remembers." To this day, Poe's notes remain sealed. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments what you would have done if this was your bloodline. In 1998, a new piece of the Blackburn puzzle surfaced, not from Kentucky, but from southern Ohio. A nurse named Gloria Farrell submitted an anonymous tip to a regional genealogy journal. She described a young female patient, around 14 years old, admitted to her hospital under emergency circumstances. The girl was malnourished, barely coherent, and, most disturbingly, 7 months pregnant. When questioned, she couldn't recall her last name. But when shown a map, she pointed directly to an unmarked patch of woods west of Jackson on the Kentucky border, the same region where the Blackburns once lived. Gloria's most haunting detail wasn't the pregnancy. It was the girl's appearance. She had mismatched eyes, one brown, one pale gray, ringed with yellow, just like Clara. She also bore scars, linear, patterned, deliberate. They weren't from accident or punishment, they looked ritualistic. Carved into her back were 3 small symbols. Gloria sketched them for the journal. Days later, the journal was pulled offline, the editor claiming unauthorized content had been leaked, but a few researchers saw it first. One was a folklorist named Dr. Mitchell Langley, who had spent 20 years studying Appalachian bloodlines, particularly isolated families with signs of generational mutation. When he saw the symbols, he recognized them immediately, not from science, but from a regional oral tradition rarely documented. The carvings matched a ritual known only in whispered legend, the womb seal, said to be performed on young girls within certain inbred clans to keep the blood from spilling too far. It wasn't a warning, it was a boundary. A way to contain something old, something sacred, or something cursed. Langley went public with his findings. A week later, he vanished. His vehicle was found burned out near Pine Mountain. Inside were torn pages from his field notes and one photo, old, cracked, and water-stained. It was the same image from 1915, the boy outside the shack. But in the corner, faint but visible, was a second figure. A girl, half hidden in shadow, holding a bundle wrapped in cloth. Her face was turned, but her eye, just one, was looking directly into the lens. It was gray. Today, the Blackburn land is overgrown, choked by bramble and moss, barely accessible on foot. There are no marked trails, no signposts, only a hollow silence broken by the wind and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Locals still avoid it, not out of fear, at least not the kind they'll admit, but out of instinct. A bone-deep warning passed down through generations: don't go where the blood remembers. No follow-up was conducted. But years later, a nurse on night duty snapped a photo of the woman during a rare moment of awareness. Her face was sunken, her hair brittle, but her eyes, one brown, one pale gray, rimmed in yellow. There are some stories that don't want to be remembered, that hide in bloodlines and decay in silence. But sometimes they resurface, not for answers, not for justice, but simply to remind us that the past is never truly gone. It is in us. Watching. Waiting.